for all of you out there, I know there's many of you. This is the question. Who's holding you back? Who holds you back from having everything you want? It could be the love of your life. It could be money. It could be fame. It could be success. Or it could be just simply quitting that job you hate. And it really comes down to, and this is the real essence of, in my opinion, success in life, is how do you go beyond yourself? Kim and I and a bunch of our advisors just studied a book, and we say we all have roommates. And roommates are all the cast of characters that live in your head. Like, Kim knows my roommate very well. It's the warrior. I love to fight. And somebody challenges me, that warrior comes out, and I want to punch and kill immediately. But it's not always appropriate in every situation. But there's also people outside of you that want to crush your dreams also. So it's really about who's holding you back, right, Kim?
Yes, and I mean, it always comes down to the same thing. We all want to blame somebody else for holding us back. He did it, she did it, mom and dad did it, all of this. But when it comes down to it, and you look right at it, the only person holding you back is you. And so our guest is going to delve into that, because I think every single one of us has something inside of us that's holding us back, and he actually has defined it and given us ideas on how to overcome it. So if there's something holding you back, you want to listen to the show, because this is going to be a way to overcome that obstacle.
The saboteur, the terrorist inside of you, the critic, the person, the loser inside of you.
The scared person, the one that says, I can't do it. I'm going to fail. I'm going to make a mistake.
How come I'm broke? How come I don't have, why am I not rich? That person, that's the person we'll be talking to today. So please listen up. He's been a guest of our program. In my opinion, he is the best author I have ever come across. The best I've ever come across. And the reason he is, in my opinion, the best is his precise, concise use of words and language. He gets his point across like it's drilling in my brain in just a few words, where I get frustrated with myself as a writer simply because I take so long to say nothing. But Steven Pressfield can say it in a few words and just blow both your eyeballs out, because you go, oh my God, how come I didn't see that before? So our guest today is Steven Pressfield. We interviewed him earlier on the book, The War of Art, and which all of our advisors got together to study for 3 days. Boy,
and
you want to study
that
a book?
Yeah, he wrote that in 2002, and that's a classic.
Yeah,
that's a classic.
And the other classic that we studied of Steven Pressfield was Turning Pro. And that was our advisors. There was about 10 of us who get together. We studied for 3 days, because knowledge is what makes us richer, not money.
And I would say he's one of our favorite authors, but more importantly, he really truly is an educator.
But he also wrote one of Kim's favorite books,
being a golfer,
and movies. It's called The Legend of Bagger Vance, because Kim
that's famous.
is a golfer.
Yes, that's fantastic. A movie, fantastic book. And some people don't know that Steven wrote this book.
So all you guys out there who are tired of sabotaging yourself, shooting yourself in the foot, holding yourself back, or blaming your husband or wife for holding you back, this is the program for you. So welcome to the program, Steven.
Welcome, Steven.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Robert. It's a pleasure to be back with you guys. Thanks for the great introduction.
Well, it comes from the heart. Hey, what's this newest book? The Knowledge. You just released a few days ago. What is that book all about?
Well, you guys were talking about The War of Art, which is about, getting out of your own way. It's sort of, I guess you'd call it a self-help book in a way. The Knowledge is actually a novel about the time in my life when I was kind of formulating that stuff about the War of Art. I was driving a cab in New York City, blah, blah, blah. It's one of those stories. It's, a real-life autobiographical novel type of thing called The Knowledge. If you want to drive a cab in London, you have to pass a government-administered test where you have to memorize the 20,000 lanes, streets, alleys, et cetera, in London. And that is called The Knowledge. So that's where that thing comes from.
Well, let me ask you this, being the salesman, who is The Knowledge written for? I mean, who is your target market?
It's really it's the story of a struggling writer, which is the same sort of thing as anybody trying to get out of their own way, of dealing with resistance. In a way, it's like the War of Art, but told in a story form. You know,
it's not just for writers; it's for anybody who wants to get out of their own way. Wouldn't you say?
Exactly. For entrepreneurs. I mean, the reason I say writers, Robert, or artists, is because a writer and an artist is sort of the ultimate entrepreneur in that they don't work for anybody else. There's nobody that makes them get up in the morning. There's nobody that gives them a paycheck. There's nobody that tells them what they have to do in the day. They're completely on their own in terms even of defining what they're trying to do, let alone how to do it or patting themselves on the back when they do it. So artists, entrepreneurs, to me, are pretty much the same thing. And I think entrepreneurs are artists. I mean, I look at you guys. You guys are artists, in my opinion.
Well, thank you.
So the knowledge is, you mentioned it's kind of the origin of the War of Art. And the main theme throughout the War of Art, Turning Pro, your other book, Do the Work, is the thing about get out of your own way. You call it resistance. So can you explain, because that's kind of your whole theme is resistance. What is resistance?
That's a great question, Kim. If you're a writer, and I know you guys know this because you're both writers, and you sit down to the typewriter or the computer and you got a blank page in front of you, immediately you know what resistance is. Because radiating off that blank page is what, to me, is a sort of a repellent force that's trying to stop you from doing your work, right? We all know it immediately, right? We come up with 1,000 excuses why we can't do it. And so for me as a writer, it took me about 7 years of like getting my butt kicked by my own brain and, thrashing around in my life before I finally sort of gave a name to that force, that negative repellent force that was trying to stop me from doing my work. And I sort of defined it for myself just as an objective force, kind of like the force of gravity or the rotation of the earth. And it's just there. Anytime you have a dream of something you want to do, a company you want to start, a book you want to write, a movie you want to make, an equal and opposite negative reaction to that dream is going to arise inside your brain, inside everybody's brain. I don't care if you're Einstein, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, the Dalai Lama, everybody has resistance. And so for me, once I sort of gave a name to it, I was able to get a handle on it and actually be able to overcome it and actually work.
Well, that's what, it's not just about writing. I think it's, like for me, when I get up in the morning, I want to go to the gym, but Fat Boy takes over, and he doesn't.
Exactly.
He says, no.
For me, it's anything, Robert, that takes us from a kind of a lower station to a higher station.
Right. That's everybody listen to what Steven Pressfield just said, because really that's where resistance comes in, is when you, quote unquote, try and self-improve or go for what you want and all that. Your resistance, your saboteur will step up and say you can't do it. Or even if you can't do it, you'll find somebody else outside of yourself, your sister-in-law, your brother-in-law, will tell you why you can't do it. And that's why, like for me, the most treacherous words, and there's a lot of treacherous words, are you can't do that. When somebody says that to me, I just go ballistic. Say, how dare you tell me that? But I do it to myself.
So Steven, what is the difference from somebody who breaks through resistance to somebody who lets resistance beat them?
Resistance is sort of like that voice that we hear in our heads that says, you can't do it, you're not good enough, you're too old, you're too fat, you're too whatever. That voice gets its power when we believe it's our voice.
Ah.
We hear that voice and we think, oh, those are my thoughts, I'm thinking that. But once you realize that those are not your thoughts, that is this, to me, an external force. I know it's coming from inside me, but it feels like it's an external force.
Yes.
Once you know that it's just BS, if I can say that on the radio here, then you can dismiss it. You hear it, what they say about meditating, that as you sit down to try to meditate, all kinds of crazy thoughts are going to go through your mind, right? My knees hurt, my back hurts, how much longer are we going to have to do this? I've got to pick up my dry cleaning, all those kind of thoughts, right? And what they teach you to do in meditation is to just let the thought come and sort of cross the movie screen of your mind like a cloud and float out the other side. And it's the same thing when you hear those thoughts in your head, you can't do it, you're not good enough, et cetera, et cetera. If you recognize them as just baloney and just let them float across your mind like a cloud and then sit down and do the freaking work. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. One thing, Robert,
dismiss that voice and do the work.
So one thing Robert and I talk about is, you're listening to your voice, thinking you are your voice, versus observing all those thoughts, observing the thoughts, not being the thoughts.
Exactly.
Right, and that's part of the hardest thing is to shut yourself up or whatever's chattering away with you.
Yeah.
Once again, this is Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Our guest today is that great author, Steven Pressfield, and his latest book, just released, is called The Knowledge. And really, it's more about knowledge of yourself in many ways, but more specifically for all of you who have ambitions and dreams and know there's something more inside of you. That's who it's for. The question is, who holds you back, or why are you holding yourself back? And that's the book, The Knowledge. Our company, the Rich Dad Company, with our advisors, we've studied two of Steven's book in depth. One is The War of Art, 2002. Another book is Turning Pro. And when we come back, we'll be talking about the difference between amateurs and pros. And it's very, very, I call it, slicing and dicing our thoughts so we can examine them. I don't care what you want to do, whether it be a great writer, a golfer, entrepreneur, rich person, whatever, what can you do? Because there's only one person between you and what you want, and that's you. So the question is, would you do it for you? And Steven is also the author of The War of Art. Once again, the Rich Dad Advisors, we get together twice a year to study books. We studied The War of Art because resistance is how we hold ourselves back. And the other book we studied of Steven is Turning Pro. He is my idol as far as a writer because he can write potently, very few words, high message value, high content. Any comments, Kim?
Yes, I want to just carry on with Steven in terms of resistance and, get out of your own way. What specifically can somebody do? I mean, when they recognize, oh my God, here's resistance. I'm sitting down to start my company, or I'm sitting down to write a book, or I'm going to go exercise and I don't want to. What specifically do you do to overcome that?
The bad news, Kim, I think, is that there's no magic bullet.
Damn.
As we all know, really. I mean, there's no trick. How do you make yourself at 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning get up and go to the gym, right? The only way to do it is to get out of bed and do it. So it's sort of an acquisition of the habit of action, of not hanging around in your head, listening to all the BS that floats back and forth. One of my little mantras is, put your ass where your heart wants to be. And what I mean by that is, if you want to be a writer, sit down in front of the keyboard. Put your body right there and just don't let yourself get up until you've done something. As we all know, it all comes down to will, right?
Yes.
There's no trick, there's no tip, there's no magic bullet.
Well, that's what, when I read The War of Art, I was writing my second book called It's Rising Time, and I got stuck. And I remember reading that, and you said, just sit down in front of the screen and sit there until you do something. And I sat there for the first day for like 2.5 hours. Nothing. And finally, something started to come. And so it really is, you have to really force yourself to sit there and do it.
So, Steven,
in a way, Kim, when I sit down to write each day, I've heard some people say, well, their goal is, 1,000 words or whatever. My goal is just to stay there for a certain amount of time. One of the things I always say is that resistance comes second. And what I mean by that is that what comes first is the dream. If you imagine, let's say, imagine a tree in a meadow. As soon as that tree pops into existence, if assuming it's a sunny day, let's say, immediately the shadow of the tree appears, right?
Right.
The shadow is resistance, and the tree is the dream of the book you want to write or the movie you want to make or whatever. So if you are feeling resistance, if somebody is saying that, I don't want to do it, when that's resistance, right? It would not be there unless there was the dream. The shadow would not be there unless there was the tree. The bottom line sort of is if someone is feeling massive resistance to something, making excuses, sabotaging themselves, etc., it's a good sign, because there would not be heavy resistance unless there was some great dream there.
Well, that's why we studied your other book, Turning Pro, in conjunction with The War of Art, is because you said something in Turning Pro, which I agree with wholeheartedly, is you said that, what's the difference between an amateur and a pro? And what most people say, well, a pro does it for money and an amateur does it for love. But what you said was profound in there, was that it's not that the amateur does it for love. The amateur doesn't love what they're doing enough. That's why they're not professional. In other words, the reason most people are not pros is they don't do what they love enough. Like you gave the example of a golf professional. If it's raining, they're practicing. If it's snowing, they're practicing. If they're losing, they're playing. They never stop. And the trouble with most people is they live in this BS world of, I'm just doing what I love. But they don't love something enough to go beyond and turn pro.
I think that's great, Robert, that you picked that up. That went over a lot of people's heads in that book.
Well, the reason is because you and I are Marines, and most people aren't Marines. You know what I mean? This is what we're taught as Marines. We don't do it for ourselves. You have to do it for somebody else. And most people are only contemplating and able doing it for themselves. Whereas a Marine, we're giving our lives for something, which is stupid. But nonetheless, we were taught to go above and beyond ourselves, and most people can't get beyond themselves. So that's why they're not pro. I'm just doing what I love, but they don't love something big enough. That's, in my opinion, that's the problem.
Well, it's true that when people say to me, and they have, well, how do I write the book that I want to write? How do I overcome this negative thing? My answer in 2 words is turn pro. And what I mean by that is it's a shift in the way you look at the world. If you think about a professional athlete, if you think about LeBron James, if he wakes up in the morning and he feels, he's kind of under the weather, he's in a bad mood, there's no way that he's not going to go practice. He's a pro, right? He's got to go do it. That's his mindset. He's a professional. Whereas an amateur will let that negative voice in their head influence them and overcome them.
The amateur will find that excuse.
Yes.
That's the
pro
difference.
Doesn't take an excuse. One of the reasons I love to watch football or basketball or something like that is you watch guys playing hurt all the time. That's life in a way. You talk about the Marine Corps, Robert. We're always hurt, right? There's always a reason. Our ankle, we always have a high ankle sprain. We always have a jammed thumb. We always have a concussion or something like that. But if you're a professional and you have the professional attitude, then you go out on the field and you lay it all down, no matter what. And the great thing about the concept of turning pro is it's free. You don't have to take any kind of course. You don't have to sign up for anything. You don't have to have anybody rip you off or anything. And it's available to you at any moment, right now, this instant. Anybody that's listening to the show and has some dream that they want to do it, they can't just get themselves together. All they have to do is flip that mental switch in their head and say, I'm no longer going to do this like an amateur. I'm going to do this like a pro. I'm going to show up every day. I'm going to stay on the job every day. I'm going to play hurt. I'm going to go through adversity, no matter how adverse it is. I'm going to look at my assignment, whatever it is, my dream, as a professional assignment, and I'm a pro to do that, and do that.
Most people are too greedy, selfish, self-centered, lazy, egotistical. They don't want to do it for anything else, and they find these excuses. So once again, our guest today is a great author, Steven Pressfield. He's a novelist and screenwriter. He's probably most famous for his book and film, The Legend of Bagger Vance, and starring Will Smith.
Classic golf movie.
His latest book is The Knowledge, just released. And other books is Do the Work, Overcome Resistance, and Get Out of Your Own Way. Also, The War of Art and Turning Pro, which was studied by the advisors. This program, Rich Dad Radio program, is just for you right now. If you're sitting there wondering what's happening to your little life right now, maybe it's because you don't have something bigger than you to look after for. You're just doing it for yourself. You make an excuse, well, I don't have to go to the gym. Oh, well, my boss is a jerk, and all this. Well, I don't like the tax laws. Well, I don't like Trump and all this stuff. And those are the people that then complain and say, well, how come I'm not rich? How come I'm not happy? How come I'm not successful? That's what makes me nauseous. Comments, Kim.
So, Steven, let me talk to you about your new book, The Knowledge. You say that we all have what is called an all is lost moment in our lives. What is an all is lost moment?
That's a great question. If you were to move to Hollywood and become a screenwriter, and you would start to learn and be taught kind of how a screenplay is written, how a movie is put together, there are a number of rules. One of them is that there's a beat in almost every movie called the all is lost moment. And it comes about 3/4 of the way through the movie. And I'll give you an example of it. Do you remember the original Rocky?
Yes.
If you remember, like 3/4 of the way through the movie, am I getting too specific here, doing this kind of telling this details here?
No, not at all.
That's exactly what we're looking for.
Yep.
Is most people never get there.
Okay. All right. So there's a scene where it's before the big fight with Apollo Creed. And Rocky goes down at night. He leaves Adrian at home in the apartment, and he goes down at night to the arena. And he walks into the arena where the fight's going to happen. And he stands there by himself, and he sees the ring, and he sees the big pictures of the big poster of himself on the wall and the big poster of Apollo Creed on the wall. And suddenly it hits him. He says, oh, my God, I'm fighting the heavyweight champ tomorrow. This guy's going to mop the floor with me, And he goes back home to Adrian, and he says, who am I kidding? What was I doing, running up the steps of the art museum and all that stuff? This guy's going to wipe the floor with me. So that's an example of the all is lost moment in a movie. And of course we have all is lost moments in our real life. And getting back to my book, The Knowledge, that's what that was about. But in a movie, the all is lost moment is always followed by a kind of an epiphany that the hero has. And in Rocky, what happened was, as he's telling Adrian that Apollo's going to beat him, who is he kidding? He's a bum. He says to himself, all I want to do is go the distance with Apollo. I just want to last to the 15th round and be still standing. I know I can't beat him. I know he's going to beat the hell out of me, but all I want to do is go the distance. And when he comes up with that sort of epiphany, everything changes for him. And that's exactly, and then in a movie you go into Act 3, and the climax comes at that point. And in this case, it's the fight, and you actually watch Rocky fight Apollo, and he does exactly that. But in our real lives, we have those moments, and we have many of those moments.
And so that's why I have our guest today, Steven Pressfield. He's an author, novelist, screenwriter. We have studied 2 of his books, The War of Art. It's called about resistance, how we hold ourselves back, and then Turning Pro, the difference between an amateur and a pro. He's also most famous for his book and film, The Legend of Bagger Vance, which was a way out there movie and book, and his latest book, Knowledge. And I love the title of that book, Knowledge, because that's where knowledge comes from. Knowledge comes from, as we're talking about, that all is lost moment. That's when you go through this breakthrough of reality. See, the only thing that holds us back is this goofy little word called reality, what you think you can do or cannot do. Some people climb Mount Everest and some people say they can't. That's the only difference. Some people are rich and some people say, well, I'll never be rich. And it's that little dinky little reality that holds people back. And so the Rich Dad Company is one of our more common questions. That, well, how do I get rich? How do I know what I'm supposed to do? Well, what if I fail? What my family's going to say to me? Man, get off of it. You can't get over that. That's why you should read Steven's books. Any comments, Kim?
Yes. So at the end of the break, Steven, you were talking about from the knowledge, all is lost moment in your own life and the epiphany moment that happened for you. Could you explain that?
So as I was saying, I had this dream. I don't know how old I was. I was in my 30s. I had this dream forever to be a novelist. And I'd been just working and working and working. And this was my third novel that was unpublished. And I had just finished it, and it had totally crashed and burned. Nobody wanted it. It was just a failure. And I said to myself, it was one of those moments like when you're an alcoholic and you wake up in the gutter, at 4 a.m, with your teeth knocked out from whatever, where you hit bottom.
Yes.
And I knew that there was no way I could summon the will to do that again, to try again and to fail. So I was sort of, at my wit's end. And in movies, in the movie land, the all is lost moment is always followed by an epiphany moment, where the protagonist has a kind of a mental breakthrough. And my epiphany came a couple of days in the midst of deciding whether I was going to hang myself or shoot myself. I thought to myself, why don't I move to Hollywood and write for the movies? I've failed at every other kind of writing. Why don't I try to fail at that? And like magic, like the clouds lifted.
Wow.
And I did pack up and I did go out there, and although I did not succeed immediately or even over the long haul, I at least had a career. But what happened was, that was the moment for me, Kim, of turning pro, where I felt like I just can't keep doing this as an amateur. I've got to learn my craft. I've got to buckle down. I've got to really do this in a professional manner. And I did, and it worked. And
I think a lot of entrepreneurs face that all is lost moment. And can they make that mindset shift and that breakthrough to keep going?
I'm sure that's true, because entrepreneurs are constantly coming up with new ideas, right? New companies, and they launch, and 90% of the time it fails, right?
Right.
So you're up against that moment of, what the hell do I do now? And usually there is an epiphany that comes after that, and it's sort of a recognition of what mistakes you were making, and then thinking, okay, let me get up off the mat and try it, and I won't make that mistake this time, which is turning pro.
This is my question, Steven. How does the knowledge correlate or relate to all is lost moments? I have my ideas, but this is your interview. I want to find out how knowledge and all is lost go hand in hand.
The knowledge is in the book, refers to the learning the streets of London, the layout of the streets of London, that a taxi cab driver, an aspiring taxi cab driver in London, has to do, and that is called the knowledge. You have to know the knowledge before you're allowed to drive. So in the book, the character that is me tries to write a book. Actually, it's a record album called The Knowledge. And the metaphor is understanding life, trying to understand not just, quote-unquote, the city, not just the metaphorical city so you could drive around it, but trying to understand your own interior life, your own negative voices, your own forces of resistance, and navigating sort of the landscape of your own soul, which, if you're an artist or an entrepreneur, you come up against all the time. So in the book, The Knowledge, the character that is me fails to acquire this knowledge. But the book ends with him kind of launching into a new life, kind of being dying and being born again, where we, the readers, kind of get it, that he's going to get the knowledge in this new life. That's kind of a long-winded answer, Robert. Right. I don't know if it makes sense.
No, but to say I understand what you're saying would be an insult to you. We all interpret what everybody says. But, for me, the way I look at it is that most people don't gain knowledge because most of them don't want to get to that all is lost moment. And to me, I call that a breakthrough, a transformation, an epiphany. You know, like when I started my first business, the nylon and Velcro surfer wallet business, nobody wants to fail. But as I was leaving, I was working for Xerox at the time I started the company in Honolulu. And the company, the employees said to me, they said, "You'll fail and you'll be back."
Yes. Don't they always say that? Yeah.
And I turned to the people, they're good friends of mine, you know, they're all employees, they all mean well. And I said, "Look, I will fail, but I'm never coming back." And I think that was the difference for me, you know, because they'll all come back because they're never going to fail anyway, so they never leave. And so all of you out there listening to what Steven Pressfield is saying is that all this lost moment, this is my interpretation, is when your knowledge increases. You go, "Oh my God, I never saw it that way." It's a breakthrough, a transformation, a metamorphosis. It's much like, you know, when a child is learning how to walk, they fall down, and one day they walk. And that's the point where transformation occurs. Same as a caterpillar going into a cocoon. It gets really hot and miserable in there. It's painful. They don't know why they're there. And then one day, poof, they're a butterfly. But people don't want to get to that point, is why they write to me and say, "What can I do, man?" And I take it all back to our educational system where they tell you that you're not supposed to fail. You're not supposed to make mistakes. What school teachers tell you that risk is a 4-letter word, and that if you fail, you're stupid. You make a mistake, you're stupid. And that is pounded into the soul of most students. And that's what when I talk to them, I say, "Oh, I just want to start a company. I failed a couple of times and I made millions." "Oh, I don't want to do that." Any comments, Kim?
Well, yeah, I would ask Steven too, because this whole afraid of failure and afraid of making a mistake, is that resistance, or is that something else?
Yes, exactly. That's what it is. And that's why
so they'd rather be comfortable.
Are entrepreneurs or artists and are on their own are very well acquainted with failure. And,
absolutely.
Yes.
And are quite comfortable with failure in a way. Well, you know, that's sort of what, you know, I would ask you guys too, that in a way, the real skill of being an entrepreneur is to be comfortable with failure.
Absolutely.
Not that you want to fail, but that when you fail, it's not the end of the world.
It's part of the process. It's part of the process.
Through the course of your life, you're going to fail over and over and over.
And that's how we get smarter.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say to a school teacher like my poor dad, you know, my real dad, a PhD? He was terrified of failing. Just absolutely petrified. So how he compensated for that was he memorized the right answers. Any answer that somebody told him was right, he'd memorize it and regurgitate it, you know, just say, "That's the right answer." But he never thought for himself for fear of being outside the box, for having a creative thought.
Isn't that the nature of what life is? I mean, even if you watch like a National Geo, you know, special about, let's say, a cheetah that has to, you know, is chasing down a gazelle. What do they say? How many times does the cheetah fail before
That's a good point.
It makes the kill, right?
Yeah, the cheetah's motivated, though.
He's hungry.
So are we all.
Yeah.
Well, actually, in a way, we're not, because it's like if our world was like the cheetah's world, we wouldn't be able to go to the grocery store and get food, right?
Yeah.
We'd have to, you know, the cheetah has no alternative.
Once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Our guest today is that great author and novelist and screenwriter, Steven Pressfield. He's here talking about his latest book, his newest book, The Knowledge. His website is StevenPressfield.com. And his book is The Knowledge, because my interpretation of what Steven is saying is I don't really get to new knowledge until I fail. And when I fail, I break through and I see something different. The risk is for most people, if they're not prepared for failing, they go into depression. That's the problem. That is the risk. And so that's why being an entrepreneur, one of the most important things that we do is be able to understand where real knowledge comes from. Real knowledge comes from failing, from breaking through, from going into a whole nother reality on life and, you know, the world. Any comments, Kim?
Yes, so I just want to ask Steven one final advice. If somebody has a dream or they have a big goal or they're taking on a new venture, and that resistance is kicking them in the butt, what do you recommend? What advice do you have for them?
If you are experiencing intense resistance and you're scared to death, that's a good sign, because it shows that the dream that you have has real power inside your soul, and that if you can pull it off, the evolution, the breakthrough will be enormous. So it goes to show you that you're alive. There's something burning inside you. There's fire in the belly. And then the bottom line, as I said before, is there's no magic bullet. To start a company, you have to start a company. To write a book, you have to sit down and write the book. There's no way around it. But if you can approach it as a professional and take it really seriously, really commit, learn what you need to do, and then do it, that's simply how things get done. That's just the bottom of the reality of the world.
Well said.
And then once again, Steven, this is the part I loved about your book, Turning Pro, is many people say, well, I do it for love. That's why I'm not a pro. And what do you say?
If you don't love it enough.
Yeah.
If you really loved it, you would commit your full force to it, and you would become a professional at it.
Right.
Who loves golf more than the professionals that are out there on the tour? Who loves basketball more than LeBron James, who's out there, on the court playing full-time, committed full-time?
And Steven?
It's not a question of money or making money.
Right.
It's a question of the depth of commitment.
And Steven, that's why I love your work, is because I get sick and tired of people telling me, oh, I'm just doing it because I love it. I don't do it for the money. And when I read Turning Pro, I went, oh, my God. That's why I don't like those people, because they actually lie to themselves. They don't love what they're doing enough. There's not enough love in their life. We archive each one of our programs simply because you can listen to it again, because if it's worth listening to, it's worth listening to again. But also you can include friends and family members listen to this program, especially with this one here with Steven Pressfield. Well, thanks to him. His newest book, The Knowledge, and it's about how to get past yourself. Most people don't love themselves enough, or they don't love other people enough, and that's why they stay amateurs rather than turning pro and doing what they have to do. One thing I loved about what Steven said about turning pro is the reason most golfers are amateurs, because when the times get tough, they stop playing. When it's too cold, they don't play. When they're losing, they quit. And that's not what pros do. So his two books, The War of Art and Turning Pro, and his latest book, The Knowledge, are worth reading, especially for those of you who are sick and tired of being amateurs. So, Melissa, what's the first question, please?
Our first question today comes from Brian in Mission, Kansas. Favorite book, Midas Touch. He says, Robert and Kim, I know failure is how we learn and certainly a part of being an entrepreneur. I tried and failed on many business ventures with modest success. The problem is now I just don't know if I have it in me to stay on my current path or throw in the towel and just go get a job. How do you stay on path when faced with several failures in a row?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I feel for you, been there, done that, and I don't really have an answer for you. But that's why we had Steven Pressfield on here, is because he calls it the all is lost moment. But that's also the edge of all is gained moment. And the reason I really have a contempt of school and school teachers is they teach you that failing is bad. Really, they should teach you how to fail and how to learn from your mistakes, how to maintain your spirit and your soul and your self-esteem. But no, they don't do that. Not those little teachers. They just punish you for making a mistake. And you think that making a mistake means you're stupid and you can never grow again. So that's why the greatest entrepreneurs dropped out of school: Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Branson, Walt Disney, and Henry Ford. So look, you better choose your teachers and your role models fairly carefully. And I would not, it's not so much what you're saying to yourself, but what others are saying about you. If you care what they say about you, care about what you say about yourself, others care about you, get that job. Any comments, Kim?
Yeah, well, if Brian obviously has a dream, he wants to be an entrepreneur. and he wants to achieve something great, but it's not happening. And I'm just going to recommend The War of Art and Turning Pro because resistance is definitely kicking in. But the other question is, if you're failing consistently, is there a common denominator in there? Are you really learning from the failures and learning from the mistakes you're making?
Well, let me give you an example of one of our friends, Kim and I have. He makes always the same mistake. He was 25 years old. He was really successful. So he marries some hot chick and has kids. And then he gets divorced, he fails again. He makes more money now. He's 50 years old. He marries another hot chick, gets divorced, has more kids. And now he's 70 years old. He fails again, gets married, has kids. He just never learns. You see?
That's what I'm saying.
It's one thing about failing, but not learning.
Yes.
And this guy now, he comes to talk to us. He's got 9,000 kids and 3 ex-wives, and he can't figure out what he did wrong. He just never learned from the first wife.
So that's what I would say to Brian. What are you doing that's not working? And really look inside and look introspectively and ask yourself, am I really learning from these mistakes I'm making and really learning from the failures? Because when you and I fail, we do our best to take that lesson and go, oh, great. Look at this great lesson we learned. Now we can apply it to our new venture.
But not if you don't get the lesson.
That's what I'm saying.
What Steven talks about is meditating and sitting quietly. And when the lesson comes to you,
you'll know it.
It's so classically clear.
Yes.
Oh, my God, I just couldn't see it. That's why the all is lost moment that Steven Pressfield writes about in his newest book, The Knowledge, is when you go into new knowledge. But only until you get to that breakdown. It's called perturbation. You perturbate, and you have this breakthrough of thought. So it's like a child learning to walk. They break through, they walk. And you haven't got there yet. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Jackson in Atlanta, Georgia. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, I'm wanting to leave my job and pursue a side business. I've been working full time. The problem is I worry about making my savings last long enough to really give my business a chance. How much is enough to have in reserve when starting out on your own?
That's a really stupid question. That is really a stupid question.
How would we know?
Because you haven't got to that all is lost moment. You haven't lived until you're about $800,000 in debt. That's an all is lost moment. And Kim has been with me when I've had that moment.
We've done it together.
And that's when you kind of wake up, and I better get to, I've been making the same mistakes. So I wouldn't worry about the savings. I would worry about, do you have the emotional fortitude to handle not having money and keeping going? That's why I said when I worked for the Xerox Corporation and I left it in 1978, I left a high-paying job. And all of those little Xerox people, they're really nice people, but they're all employees. They're terrified of losing that paycheck. And as I left the door, they said to me, you'll be back. We've seen guys like you. You're going to fail, and you'll be back. I said, there's one difference between you and me. I will fail, but I'm never coming back. And that's the difference. Any comments, Kim?
Yeah, I would say to Jackson, something I learned years and years ago, there's 4 types of people in the world. There's those that I must be right at all costs, I must win, I must be liked, and I must be comfortable. And it sounds like Jackson's saying, how can I make my savings last long enough for my business to have a chance? He sounds like he wants to be comfortable. And I think as an entrepreneur, both Robert and I and all of our friends are, I must win. I must win at all costs. So when we have nothing, when we're negative, when we're scrambling, that's where a lot of real learning and growth happens.
That's
because
where the
you've got to survive. That's where the breakthrough comes from. So you've got to have that I must win attitude, I believe, to really be a successful entrepreneur and not worry about being comfortable.
And if you don't have that, don't do it. Don't do it. You're not ready for it yet. Just take a break for a while, chill out, have a Diet Coke, sit in the lawn chair, and watch the NBA and watch NFL. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Sarah in Houston, Texas. Favorite book, Rich Woman.
Hey, Sarah, thank you. Appreciate it.
She says, I've just left my, quote, stable job with a company I'd been with for 10 years. I went into business with a longtime friend, and I've never been happier. The problem is my family keeps worrying that I'm not going to make it, and it's making me start to doubt myself. How do you ignore those that don't support your mission?
Well, it's kind of stupid to ask them to support your mission when you may not even know what your mission is or stuff like this. Look, it's good they doubt you, because that should make you stronger in your resolve to keep learning. Again, I like what Steven says, the all is lost moment. When you get there, you'll find out whether you have it or not. And I congratulate you for taking that first step. But the thing about being an entrepreneur, you never get there. There's always another step. The trouble with school teachers and people who are the academic or the politically elite that voted against Trump and voted for Hillary and all this, they've really got to realize that by giving people money, by protecting them, not saying don't make mistakes, we're crippling people. We're crippling them. Human beings are designed to learn from their mistakes. Let them make mistakes. When we give people money, we don't make them richer. We keep them poorer longer. That's my philosophy. Your philosophy is probably different. So find your philosophy. Let me say something. Just watch a little child learning to walk. Watch a child learning to talk. Watch a child learning to ride a bicycle, because that's really what it really takes. It's not to be a child again, but it's to be childlike, to be willing to stand up and fall down. That's the big difference.
And I would say to Sarah, too, that they're afraid that you're not going to make it. Well, that's their fear. That's not her fear. That's not your fear, Sarah. That's their fear, because they probably have never set out as entrepreneurs. So as Robert said, yeah, use their fear and their doubts to be a motivator, but then at some point stop listening to them. I mean, I made a decision years ago to get the negative people out of my life. I got enough negativity in my own mind telling me, doubting myself and what about this and what about that, and I'm going to fail. And that. I got enough going on in my own head. I don't need other people around me validating that. So I would just quiet the noise.
And the two things I always recommend to people is three things. Read a book. Read Pressfield's book, The War of Art and Turning Pro, the knowledge. Get some ideas from people who have gone through the process. Find a mentor. My rich dad was a mentor to me. That's a very big difference. He's gone through failure. And the other thing is hire a coach. I have coaches. I always have coaches. So if you say, well, I don't have money, then you're probably never going to make it as an entrepreneur anyway, because entrepreneurs never have money. You're not supposed to have money. You're supposed to be working to produce money, create assets. It's like the first guy wanted to hang on to his savings. Well, it's nice if you have a lot of savings, but that's what most college professors do. They need that savings. They need the rug to, the security blanket, and they need to suck their thumb all day long. So they should never be entrepreneurs. Your decision right now is, do you have the courage to be an entrepreneur, to be a warrior, to step forward? That's the difference.